Hi, I'm Chef Breanna. This is Silent Generation.
I'm Nathan.
This will be an episode about restaurants with names like Noma and Elska and Ever. It's about a precise theater stemming from military discipline that ends in a intricate dining experience. In this episode, we'll explore the history, the high stakes techniques, and the ever evolving sphere of the world's most prestigious kitchens. Nathan, what do you know about fine dining and what is your personal relationship to it?
My personal relationship to fine dining as a Chicagoan is just that I've never really had to intentionally seek out really good food because there are restaurants all throughout the city that are not, Michelin star restaurants or places that would be considered fine dining. Like, I have this list in my notes app that I've shown you before, right?
Yes, I've seen that list. It's such a mighty list.
Yeah. So it's organized by country. There are little flags next to the name of each restaurant, and they're all over the place. It's honestly like not that convenient to get to a lot of them. But I've realized that for me, seeking out good food, I put effort in through traveling, and it's not as much through just like spending a lot of money.
Yeah, that's I actually really like that about your approach to dining. Like you're more so about the experience and the cuisine type than throwing down an inordinate amount of money, which I feel like in a lot of fine dining culture, the high price tag can sometimes be a flex for some people.
Yeah. No, I mean, even at home, my dad growing up, he would watch Food Network all the time, and we would watch Iron Chef like pretty much every week on Sunday nights. And I grew up with really good home cooked food as well. So I just feel like I've never had to really go out of my way to get great cuisine. But what is your relationship to fine dining?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really into fine dining. Kind of as I mentioned in the last episode, for a few years now, I got really into it back when I was living in Copenhagen. And then ever since then, I just kind of seek it out because I've just always been really curious about the different experiences you can have with fine dining. Like, it's part of why I love visiting Chicago because I feel like even in the smallest places, you get the most interesting experiences. And
Yeah.
we experienced a Michelin restaurant together. Wanna talk about that now or later on?
I think we should address that later as part of the Michelin guide part of the episode. We'll go into depth about that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, that place, it actually was the 2nd place to be crowned with a Michelin star, here in Dallas where I live, but I had been to a handful of those fine dining restaurants that had Michelin stars beforehand that were elsewhere, and so, yeah, we'll definitely get into that, but, yeah, I feel like the draw for me really is just, like, a combination of all the things I love about it, which is just, like, being able to experience something very new, very high quality, and a really nice atmosphere, and usually with some family and friends that I really wanna share it with, like, that to me is the real draw.
It's not just fine dining that you seek out, though. You consider being a foodie to be one of your hobbies or personality traits, which to me, growing up, when I first heard about the term foodie, it seemed kind of odd to me. Like, who doesn't like eating at restaurants?
Yeah, because I mean, it's like those people who say, "I love food" on their dating app profile. It's like, "I love food and walking," It's just like it's just so basic, but I feel like a foodie is someone who they really enjoy, like, the novelty, and they really get more, like, down in the weeds about eating than the average person does, Like, they really get into things like atmosphere and the cuisines and the way things are presented and the ingredients, like, they really concern themselves with that versus I feel like the more standard approach to that is to, just go somewhere, say something very, basic about it, like it, didn't like it, and then just kinda move on as opposed to writing, like, reviews or making their whole personality the fact that they like restaurants.
I feel like there's a difference between the type of person who consumes restaurant content and the type that doesn't. Like, I like going to restaurants, but I never intentionally seek out like Instagram reels or TikTok videos about, the hottest new restaurants in town.
Oh, yeah. I mean, me and my foodie friends were, like, the opposite. We love to, like, read restaurant and foodie publications, which we'll get into that in this episode, but publications that write about the broader culture of food and that's part of our, discussions.
And before we start to get into fine dining more, I want to kind of tie this episode back to what we discussed last week with dinner parties because traditionally, fine dining was something that was enjoyed at home. Aristocrats, wealthy people, they would have elaborate dinners and dinner parties. And originally, when you went out to eat, it was typically only when you traveled at inns, but those inns served really simple food. So, when and where did fine dining at restaurants first emerge? I can kind of answer this, but do you want to contribute?
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah. I mean, fine dining, the foundations were actually stemming from the French Revolution in the late 18th century because, what happened after the French Revolution is that chefs who were in the royal palace were, kinda ousted from that forcibly, and they began opening their own restaurants, and that's kind of the roots of fine dining in the sense that, these were extremely highly trained chefs using only the best ingredients as opposed to the average dining experience. And before this was established, like the only real way to have a fine dining experience was technically like at a dinner party, like you said, like you had to literally be in someone's home who was really wealthy. And that whole experience of having those very high quality ingredients and preparation really was just reserved for the very wealthy and aristocracy.
Yeah. Eating out used to not be glamorous. I mean, it's more of a stretch to connect modern fine dining to, say, the thermopoliums of ancient Rome. Are you familiar with those?
No, the Thermopolians. Tell me about those.
So the Roman plebeians, the working class, the lower class, they would eat out because they lived in really small apartments in apartment buildings called insulae. And they would actually go to what were called thermopoliums to eat. But that was simply because they were so poor they couldn't afford kitchens. So the patricians, the upper class Romans, they would still choose to eat at home because that was where the finest dining could be found.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Like, I'm not big on Greek, like, history and all that, but, yeah, but
Yeah,
I do know that the patricians were the ones who were mostly interacting with the more high-end, side of things.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I feel like, even though that's such a big part of it, I feel like France really is the basis of a lot of fine dining. Like as a country, they really do have the main feature here.
yeah.
But, yeah, with that being said, let's dive into the primary figures in the world of fine dining. I mean, the first one, that I think we both wanna talk about is, A. Boulanger, because, he's someone who he's in the running for, the quote unquote "first celebrity chef." And, he was a French soup maker who, originally started working in the late 18th century in around 1765. And, he actually coined the word, restaurants as we know it in popular speech.
It originally meant restoratives in French. Maybe it still means that. But it referred to soup and broths, which were restorative. But I actually found a different source that is like a blog post where someone says that there's another French person who likely was the first person to create a restaurant, but the apocryphal story is that it was a boulanger.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. Wow, I mean, it's been so long since these people were active that, yeah, it makes sense that there would be so much, like, contested
Yeah.
history.
I mean, the idea that we know today who created the first restaurant, that's kind of too good to be true. But I wanna ask you about Marie-Antoine Careme because that's someone I don't actually really know about.
Yeah, so, Carême, he's actually the one responsible for the concept of, like, courses during meals, and that will become a really big aspect later on because courses as narrative arcs were a really big deal when it comes to, assessing restaurants, and also a lot of the tropes that we think of when it comes to a chef, like the chef's hat, the concept of, like, white clothes being chef's clothes, all of that comes from Carême. And, what I found interesting about his history is that he actually wasn't originally wealthy. Like, he came from poverty, and he grew up the ranks to serve royalty like Napoleon, Tsar Alexander the First. Like, he really did rise up the ranks, of the restaurant world to become, contestably the world's first quote unquote "celebrity chef."
Yeah, that's interesting. There's another chef, Paul Bocuse, who there are a lot of photographs with him with a really tall chef's hat. Is that the sort of hat that Marie-Antoine Careme also wore?
Yeah, yeah, that's called a toque in French.
Interesting. How's your French pronunciation?
It's actually pretty decent because growing up, I took French quite a bit, so, I'll try to flex my French skills in this episode.
Yeah, my French pronunciation is really awful because I've never actually tried to learn French, and then I then want to pronounce it like Portuguese, like try to say restaurants the way that a Boulanger's sign said. My instinct would be to say like restaurantes, like in Portuguese,
Oh.
but that's why I always botch whenever I try to say or pronounce anything French. It's because it's so similar, at least written to Portuguese.
Yeah, like your mind is still stuck in the way the vowels and the consonants sound in Portuguese.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that being said, I mean, I feel like Bocuse is a really big one. Also, Escoffier is a really big one too, because as we'll talk about like later in this episode, Escoffier is someone who really brought the idea of like military discipline and that very hierarchical and competitive structure into the restaurant world. And he brought in what was called the brigade system from the military. So when we get into things like how hierarchical kitchens can be, with the concept of things like the sous chef and everything like that, we'll see that actually that stemmed from Escoffier, and a lot of the strictness of kitchen culture that's really central partially stems from Escoffier.
And then, Eugénie Brazier, is that how you say it correctly?
Brazier, Eugénie
Brazier.
Brazier, yeah.
Okay, I'm really trying. Okay, so you said that she's literally mother. What is it that you like so much about her?
She is mother because one thing I will say about the history of cuisine is that a lot of times women are erased from that history. Like Brazier, she was the mentor to so many people and so many male chefs as well. And I feel like her history and her legacy gets so erased because a lot of the times when people recount the history of fine dining and cuisine, she gets written out of the story. So, even nowadays, right? I mean, we talk about media later on in this episode, but even these days, like it's very male centric when people talk about famous chefs. But Brazier actually was super impressive in her own right. She was the first person to ever hold 6 simultaneous Michelin stars on her restaurants.
Yeah, she had those Michelin stars at 2 restaurants in Lyon. They both have the same name, and one is still open. It still has 2 Michelin stars to this day, but something I learned as part of research this week is that within France, the finest cuisine, or the city that has the reputation for having the best food, it's Lyon. I would think it would be Paris, but actually there have been a lot of very famous chefs in Lyon, many of which were trained by Eugène Brazier.
Yeah, yeah, Lyon is the true capital. Like, I've never been, but it really is like the thinking man's French city to travel to, you know? It's like for people in the know about France to travel to, they go to Lyon instead of Paris. But yeah.
Yeah. One of the more famous chefs that she trained was Paul Bocuse. Eugénie, Brazier was known for making dishes that were extremely traditional, like, one of her most iconic dishes was chicken and half morning. It wasn't meant to be, like, super innovative, it was meant to be very traditional, authentic French cuisine, but her student, Paul Bocuse, and then many of the others that she trained, they started to be a bit more innovative in their fine dining.
Yeah, yeah, extremely, extremely. I mean, those were all the classic ones that I identified. You wanna move on to the modern ones?
Sure. You can introduce the first 2.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we'll get more into their restaurants in this episode, but two really big ones are Ferran Adria and Rene Redzepi. And these two are really significant because they were really huge figures in the concept of molecular gastronomy. And they're both people who, if you were to think of extremely fine dining, extremely expensive restaurants, things like Noma, things that have foam, things that have, tons of fanfare attached to them. These are the two restaurateurs that really were the pioneers of that aesthetic.
Yeah. It was interesting reading about Ferran Adria's restaurant. He, as you said, he was known for making dishes that had culinary foam and were very deconstructed. One of them was a liquid olive, which used a process called reverse spherification. I found this really interesting description on a website of how they do that. In this science lab-esque process, juice from uncured green olives is mixed with sodium gluconate, which is then dropped into a bath of water and sodium alginate. The resulting spheres are coated in olive oil and served on tasting spoons. So that kind of sounds like, industrial processing or something. Like, that doesn't sound, like it's using, say, the freshest ingredients like so many chefs like to market themselves as doing. And he actually has been criticized because the dishes may or may not be kind of unhealthy because they use so many chemicals. Like, there's a German food writer who said that these colorants, gelling agents, emulsifiers, and acidifiers have been introduced massively into his dishes to obtain extraordinary textures, tastes, and sensations, but they do not have a neutral impact on health.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the biggest departures that, he was responsible for is that, he put way more emphasis on novelty and this very almost like 2010s idea of, like, science as being a main draw for someone to go somewhere, like, the idea that you could show off in maybe, like, a TV special or a documentary just how novel and crazy these ingredients and these prep tactics were, that was the draw for the restaurant. It wasn't necessarily where they sourced the ingredients or how fresh the ingredients were. And yeah, I was someone who was a really big fan of this type of thing back when it was popular. Like obviously I couldn't go to these restaurants because at this time I was a lot younger, but the idea of having like liquid nitrogen ice cream or spherification foods and deconstructed salad. Like, it's considered very pretentious, but also it really appeals to like the science fan or the chemist and, any young person. So, I've never been to like Noma or any of Adria's restaurants, but it definitely looks really neat.
Yeah, I remember watching restaurants on Food Network that had that sort of gastronomic bent where it was all about serving dishes to patrons that might look like they're going to be sweet, but then they're actually salty, or that look like a tomato, but actually they're a strawberry. Like that kind of really complex science that goes on behind the scenes in those kitchens. And those are the most expensive restaurants because, I mean, a lot of work has to go into figuring out the chemistry behind what they're doing. Like Ferran Adria's main restaurant, it's now closed, but when it was open, it would only be open 6 months out of the year because the other half, they had to spend quite a bit of time doing R&D, essentially, research, in order to figure out how to make dishes that were that complex.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, those are restaurants where I mean, we'll get into this, but those are the restaurants where you really get to see why that price tag is so high, like, the amount of effort that just goes into a single little dish. It's like people see the dish and it's like, it's so small and it's so expensive, and, like, they wonder why. It's because all of these processes and, like you said, R&D are going into it.
Yeah. But Rene Redzepi, he has a bit of a different approach than his mentor. He was trained by Adria for a season in 1999. But Redzepi, he is the owner of Noma. You mentioned the name of that restaurant a few times. It's a 3-star Michelin restaurant that's consistently ranked the best in the world. And his approach to fine dining is really centered around the act of foraging. So he only uses ingredients that are available in Scandinavia. So I found this cool video on YouTube where he goes with someone to a beach in Denmark and they find what is called beach asparagus and then they eat it on site and then they go back to his restaurant and they cook it as part of a dish. And so he uses all of these like interesting ingredients that aren't typically used in cuisine. And to me, that also seems worth it because, 90% of the calories that people get come from 12 plants and 5 animals. So anytime you get to consume something that is like a once in a lifetime thing, like you never have this plant or a piece of fruit or animal otherwise, I can see how that's worth the price.
Wow, where'd you pull the 12 plants and 5 animals, number from?
I learned it from a class in college on the Anthropocene because that's one of the sort of, you know, that's the geological era that's proposed that's starting basically with humans, that we've had such a big impact on the globe that we're now visible in the geological record. And I learned about that statistic because chicken bones are one of the best candidates for the Anthropocene. Because all throughout the globe, millions of years from now, during this particular time, there's going to be a really noticeable layer of way too many chicken bones. It's going to look maybe like these chickens were everywhere all at once, but it was because of us.
Yeah, it's like you stumble upon a trash heap that's just, like, tons of KFC buckets, but it's 3,000 years in the future, so you're like, "Wow, there must have been chickens roaming around everywhere. There must have been overpopulated with chickens," but no, it was just, yeah, the fact that we eat so few different animals.
Yeah, there are going to be so many more chicken bone fossils than fossils of us.
Yeah, that's kinda scary to think about, like, how there are more cows than people in Montana or something. Yeah, that's so
But
real. Yeah, I feel like Noma is just one of those restaurants, kind of like the work of Adria, where, it was spread so far and wide just because of how influential it was, and it just kinda became the moniker of fine dining for so long, and, yeah, I never got to go there, but I had some friends who went back when I was living in the area, and, yeah, they ate some amazing stuff. They ate ants,
interesting.
which is very uncommon, obviously, but they said it was pretty good. Like, as long as you ignore the fact that you typically don't eat ants and you actually like eat it, they said that it was so well prepared. So yeah, like we should definitely branch out more, I guess is the lesson of Noma.
Yeah. I had some granola bars once that had ants in them, but I couldn't really detect the taste.
Did it like advertise that there were ants in them?
Yeah, it was for another random art school college class I took on insect aesthetics. The teacher brought us these granola bars that had ants ground up and put into them. And that's gonna really gross out some of our listeners to hear that, I'm sorry.
That's my nightmare. I'm glad you have fun though.
Yeah. And then finally, we can talk about Joel Robuchon.
Yeah, this is a really big one. We actually, actually, you first heard his name because we'll talk about this later on, but you actually ate some food by someone who was trained under him recently. Like, he's super duper influential. He's someone who also is a three Michelin star chef, very, very high regard. And his restaurants are actually named after him. So they're very easy to spot. His signature dish can you tell us about that, Nathan?
Oh, yeah, it's mashed potatoes. The mashed potato recipe he uses, it has a ratio of potatoes to butter that is for every 1 part butter, there's 2 part potatoes, so that 1/3 of the dish is essentially butter. You can tell from pictures. It looks really creamy, it has, like, a very noticeable yellow hue to it, but that's absurd. I mean, this is a really good example of how restaurant food is made like someone is like, they're cooking because they hate you. It's almost like they want you to die prematurely.
Yeah, I laugh when you said that because it is kind of a trope, right? Like the idea that everyone's running around like, how does restaurant food taste so good and mine doesn't taste as good? It's like, well, they put 10 times the amount of butter, salt, and MSG than you would ever put in your own food. So be grateful that you're not eating restaurant food for every meal. Or if you are, that's pretty unhealthy because yeah, the amount they put in is just kind of insane if you actually look behind the kitchen.
Yeah. But Joel Robuchon, he, I believe during his lifetime was awarded the most Michelin stars of any chef ever. I think it was 18, and that mashed potatoes dish, he served at all of those restaurants, it was his signature. But he was so good at cooking apparently because I learned from the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which we'll talk about later, that Jiro, the chef in that documentary, he says that he wished he had this like palate, the sense of smell and taste that Joel Robuchon has, because that for chefs is the only sort of prerequisite of natural talent. Your ability to sense fine differences in terms of the salinity or the sweetness of something is the difference between being a master chef and a mediocre one.
Yeah, like, when he said that in a documentary, I actually hadn't remembered that line, and so, like, hearing him say that it was really notable because, I mean, obviously, sushi is such a subtle dish, right? Like, so for Jiro to say that of all people is, like, a really, really high, regard.
I
Yeah.
imagine that Jiro probably got to eat Joel Robuchon's food at some point based off of how he talked about him, but I wonder what that experience was like for him.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because it's very different from what he actually prepares in his sushi restaurant. But, also there was another modern chef that I wanted to mention who really surprised me when I did research about him, who was, Gordon Ramsay, he another celebrity chef who, you likely have heard of. This is someone who I originally had thought of him as just a reality TV show star, but he actually holds 8 Michelin stars across 5 different restaurants. And that's just a lot more regard than I had initially thought he had. Like, there's a reason that he's so famous and, in the public eye, he's known now as a reality TV show star, but he really, really rose through the ranks to become as famous as he is with some really great restaurants.
Yeah. Just know him through Food Network shows. I just remember him screaming and being really mean to people.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of cursing, which you're probably not a fan of.
Yeah, not a big fan.
Yeah. Have you ever met a celebrity chef?
Yes, more or less. One that's famous within Chicago, Jason Hamill. He is the owner, the founder of Lula Cafe in Logan Square. Doesn't have a Michelin star, but as I'll talk about later, I think it should. It's run by Jason Hamill, who also created the restaurant at the Museum of Contemporary Art called Marisol. So the menus were similar. They shared some of the same dishes, literally. But yeah, I met him once. He was really nice. His Instagram, though, you can tell he's hot. He's like a
Oh,
straight guy with
okay,
2
wait.
kids, but yeah, just the way he takes selfies and the pictures he posts, I don't know, you can tell he thinks he's like a hot dad.
A DILF, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually met a celebrity chef myself as well. There's a chef here that is pretty prominent in Dallas named Tiffany Derry. She's very invested in kind of redefining Southern cooking and Southern food, and she made her name by actually being on Top Chef. And so, she's been on these cooking shows, and then she opened a really popular restaurant here called Roots Southern Table, and that's a restaurant where, you'll actually find high-end Southern cooking. So high-end versions of things like, fried chicken or cornbread or collard greens, like things that you wouldn't think of being high end or fine dining. She turns that into a fine dining experience. And yeah, she's also super nice. I met her at a tasting and she told us about how she studied in France and everything to become a great chef. So that was pretty enlightening. But yeah, I mean, with that being said, let's dive into the true pillars of fine dining and really what makes a restaurant a fine dining establishment. And this will really help guide us when we start talking about things like the Michelin Guide and the various discourse and criticism surrounding fine dining. So, what does make a fine dining restaurant? Well, first, you've got the central stuff, which is the food itself, right? This encompasses techniques, preparation, and presentation. And this is where things get very technical. So I won't get too into the lore here, but I did read a bit of a book called On Food and Cooking: The Science and Lore of the Kitchen. And that's essentially like the Bible of fine dining. And what I learned actually is that the sauce, especially in French fine dining, is considered essential. There's even a role for a person who's responsible for it called a saucier. Had you heard of a saucier before?
No, but I know that fine dining restaurants will have people that have roles as specific as that, as say, like a chocolatier.
Yeah, very true. Like, I'm sure you probably caught on to this in the Chef's Table episode, but yeah, like with how specific these dishes can get, you kind of need someone on every aspect of that one tiny dish to make it perfect, right? So, yeah, so in this book on food and cooking, you really learned about how even something as simple as sauce is kind of a luxury because, on one sauce, like the kitchen might spend over 48 hours of labor on just one sauce that you're eating with your dish. And, the fact that this is so central primarily comes from the French origins of fine dining. But as we already mentioned, molecular gastronomy is also a really huge trend here too. So the techniques and prep there also very high end, very high investment, and also very essential to fine dining.
Yeah, my dad mentioned that to me, that fine dining, it's all about the sauces.
Yep. your dad was right. It's all about the sauce.
Yeah.
And yeah, aside from that, presentation, right? Presentation is huge here. So I know, Nathan, you were able to catch the Chef's Table episode we watched, which we'll get into, which was about Alinea in Chicago. And they are very, very invested in specific presentation.
Yeah.
So a lot of fine dining restaurants, they combine very, very precise, delicate plating with these days almost like a performance aspect that each dish has, right? So it's not just that it's plated really well, but things will transform, they'll move. As we said, they might smoke or steam a little bit, like it's something that almost is like a show in and of itself.
Yeah, like with Alinea in Chicago, for some of the dishes, they actually turn the entire tabletop into a plate, essentially. They roll out something that they then are able to plate food on. And yeah, that presentation is really Alinea's angle of fine dining.
Yeah, I was so impressed when I saw that, and, yeah, I was so sad to hear they lost the star, though, like, just seeing that, episode of Chef's Table made me think about how, like, innovative they were, and, yeah, I gotta check it out, but, yeah, for sure, that whole idea of turning the table into a plate is just so, like, innovative, and that's something that people really look at when they think about, what makes a fine dining restaurant, extremely creative. And, also kind of on the side to this, but sommeliers are really a big part of this too, right? Like, I
What
know
is that?
Nathan. Oh, that's right. Because you, also are a teetotaler, which is someone who does not partake in alcohol. So I'll explain it to you. A
Yeah.
sommelier is someone who is an expert in wine and mixology. So there's someone that you'll consult if you need to know what wine or drink goes best with your specific dish. So, you know how sometimes, I'm not sure if you noticed this, but when we sat down to eat at that Michelin place, they gave me a wine list, but it was like a book long. Like it was almost legitimately like the size of a book. And like these wine lists can get so insanely long that a sommelier is kind of involved because you need someone to turn to and just say, "Hey, I'm ordering the pasta. What goes best with that? What do you recommend if I like this type of wine over that type of wine?" And so on. And so you don't have to parse through this book long wine list whenever you want to pair your wine with something. But yeah, along with that, there's also the aspect of being on trend or having a very high-low approach to food. There's even a lot of discourse online right now about how restaurants are almost becoming too on trend or almost following all of the same trends to the point where it can get kind of samey, right? So originality is also a really big part of this. But aside from just the food, there's this stuff surrounding the food, right? I mean, there are definitely Michelin restaurants that are very low key, but for the most part, Michelin restaurants have a very specific ambiance and sense of service. So, Nathan, is there any specific things in ambiance you've noticed that connects a lot of fine dining restaurants?
I mean, I'm pretty particular about ambiance. For a lot of people, I think that has to do with lighting, but for me, it's noise. I don't like when I'm in a restaurant and I feel like the people next to me can hear my conversation. So having a good balance between diners speaking and then the music that's playing makes it a lot more comfortable for me.
Did you feel like the people next to us could hear us speaking at that Michelin restaurant?
I didn't really notice, but actually, I was at a dinner yesterday where I left. This is
Oh.
gonna make me sound crazy, but I left it, like, after a couple of minutes because the people at the table were just too loud. Never do that sort of thing, but, like, if the noise is off, I don't like it.
So wait, the people at the table with you or like the table over?
We were seated in a private room, it was like a birthday dinner with 10 people, and because
Oh.
we were in an enclosed space, it just got too loud. I mean, if the people at the table were, like, less noisy, it wouldn't have been so, like, insufferable, but yeah, I had to leave. That makes me sound like I'm super anxious, but I'm not.
Yeah. But no, I get that though. Like sometimes, especially if that room is super small, it creates an echo, right? It can be like super overwhelming. And that's part of what goes into planning restaurants like this, right? You really have to keep every element of the diner's experience in mind, right? Like, I even saw this episode about fine dining from this show called 7 Days Out about a very, very famous restaurant in New York where they were actually getting very particular about the fabric of the chair and, like, the angle that the table was at so that you could place your feet comfortably, right? So every single detail is really attended to, when it comes to restaurants at this level, and what you just said is part of a big element of that, right? So, ambiance is huge. We'll get into things like storytelling when it comes to the Michelin side of things, but ambiance and service are really what set these, restaurants apart as well. And when it comes to service, there's this mentality that, you'll hear quoted from time to time in dining media, which is that every day is the Super Bowl. Had you heard this before when it came to dining?
No, but I've heard a similar idiom that is used in the art world where basically you're only as good as your last show. Another way I've heard it put is sort of with the Red Queen hypothesis, where you have to keep running to stay in the same place. That's in reference to Alice in Wonderland. But yeah, you do have to always be your best.
The reason that in fine dining they feel that way is because, you know, it's kind of like live theater, right? Or like a musical where this is someone's probably one chance, one or two maybe chance to eat at a restaurant that costs upwards of 400 bucks per seating, right? So, the idea of dropping the ball on a given night is not really an option for these people because, what you'll see is a lot of people will save up for a really long time for maybe an anniversary or a Valentine's Day or a big gift, and they'll go to this restaurant to celebrate that. So it's up to you as the kitchen staff to make that night the best night for that person possible. And, yeah, it's really part of the very exacting culture that you can see in a lot of these restaurants.
Yeah.
That leads us into our section about the Michelin Guide as a whole, right? It's basically a guide that hangs over a lot of the dining world because of how important the opinion in this guide is. So, Nathan, what did you know about the Michelin Guide before this episode?
I knew it was associated with the Michelin Man. Michelin Man is used to sell tires, but I didn't exactly know why the Michelin Guide and the Michelin Man were connected.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually published, you're right, by the French tire company Michelin, originally in the early 1900s, just to spread the word about the company itself. And the way it works is they anonymously rate and review a bunch of restaurants under the Michelin name, right? So they don't walk in and say, I'm a Michelin inspector, so be on your best behavior, right? What they actually do is they come in like any other person, almost like a food inspector, right? They just come in, they are just people trying to be treated normally, and they always come in multiple times as well. Because as we'll talk about, consistency is a really big part of this guide too. So
Wait,
what
though,
do they
from my understanding, Michelin Guide, they initially published it because in 1900, when the first one came out, there were only about 3,000 automobiles on the road. And car travel at the time, both in Europe and the United States, it was sort of a slapdash activity in a way because there weren't a lot of businesses that catered to automobiles. And so the Michelin Guide, it listed places that could sell petrol, gasoline, that could repair cars if they broke down, but also restaurants because prior to the Michelin Guide and the rise of automobiles, for the rich and people in general, if they traveled long distances, they had catered meals either on trains or by boat when they were traveling on a cruise ship. And so this was a very different form of travel that required eating out in a way that had never been required before. And I didn't realize that the rise of restaurants and fine dining was linked to mobility to the degree that it is. Because, I mean, other than inns and very early restaurants in France, fine dining continued to be a thing that rich people did at home up until the rise of the automobile. That's really what, like, sort of spurred restaurants and dining out into what it is today.
I didn't know that. Okay, so it was kinda like they were selling tires by proxy because they were encouraging more people to get on the road and therefore selling more tires.
And for existing customers to basically travel more and they need to buy more tires because their tires wore out. Yeah. They initially gave them out for free even, and then they started charging after a period of time.
Wow, that's so smart. It's almost like they had an indirect marketing plan to sell more Michelin tires.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And the Michelin Guide initially it only covered France, so that further cements the connection between France and fine dining. But they expanded the guide more and more as time went on. And the current Michelin Guide it rates restaurants in 60 destinations in 37 countries.
Yeah, yeah, it's super international now. They really make a point to go to, like, the furthest reaches that they can find in order to find the best, like, dining experiences.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the guide, it's like, people think it's just general quality of restaurant, but there's actually a pretty, set number of, things they judge, right? So, first of all, obviously, ingredient quality, right? They look to see what the quality of the food itself is, and then they go on to flavor harmony. So, not only should these ingredients be high quality, but you should be cooking them in a way that is harmonious and that melts well together. And then there's technique. So, when you prepare it, is it well prepared, right? These great ingredients, this great recipe, are you actually preparing it well? And then you've got consistency. And this is the part that is, what requires the Michelin inspectors to come in over and over and over again, right? They really have to judge to see, okay, are these restaurants delivering consistently great experiences for everyone? And then finally, and this is the one that's a bit more contentious, is personality of the chef. Right? So, does the chef express a very intentional message through their cuisine, or is it something that is a bit more generic? Right? And this is really what puts just normal fine dining way up into the three-star Michelin range. These are what turn, just good restaurants into some of the best in the world.
I mean, I think I can kind of discern now the difference between a three-star Michelin restaurant and a one-star Michelin restaurant. Uh, Say Alinea, for example, I doubt there's much of a difference between what it's like today with 2 stars versus what it was like with 3 stars.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point, like, the fact that especially consistency is a big part of this. It's like the ephemerality of, a specific dining experience can make it so hard to say definitively what number of stars this restaurant should have, right? Like, maybe the inspector came in on a rough day or a rough couple of days, or maybe their tastes just weren't aligned with the chef was thinking. Right, like, there's just so many things that are up in the air, and I'm actually kinda curious now what lost, Alinea that extra star because, yeah, like, just the fact that you can lose a star, it kinda harkens back to that idea of, like, the Red Queen that you mentioned, right? Like, you're always kinda running, trying to make sure that you're keeping up with the standard that you had set.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so now that we've kind of gone into what the guide looks for, let's go into our experiences with Michelin Guide restaurants. So, Nathan, what's your experience with Michelin Guide restaurants?
So when I looked through the Michelin Guide restaurant, I was surprised to find I'd actually been to a bunch that are listed. I found out they're bib gourmands, so they're the restaurants that are not awarded stars, but Michelin still recommends them because they offer good food for a good price. They're in the cheaper end. So I've been to some like say BD, Andros Taverna, Warlord, Chimera, Lula Cafe, Iname. These are restaurants that most of them I don't really think of as being fine dining because my interactions with them have been really casual. Like, for example, Demera, I have this one memory of going there after Pitchfork, the music festival, with a friend. We were both wearing like music festival clothing. We looked really casual, and the waiter actually seemed to be irritated that we were there because we didn't look nice enough. But yeah, a lot of these I have been to, and it wasn't like a special occasion thing where I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get fine dining."
Yeah, yeah, Bib Gourmand, it technically is not a starred, type of restaurant, so that's where you'll see, like, the more affordable options when it comes to Michelin Guide, so, I've been to a few of those as well, so still really great food and pretty consistent, but not at the level of these, insane 2, 400 plus dollar menus, right? But when it comes to, like, starred restaurants, I've technically been to 5, 2 of which were up there in Chicago, Nathan, actually. There was one American one called Boca, which I highly recommend, probably one of my favorite restaurants I've been to, and there was one Scandinavian one called Elska, which means love in Danish, so, I love Denmark, so I had to visit that one. And, I went to one in Japan called Daigo for a very traditional Japanese meal. I've been to an omakase place here in Dallas called Tatsu, and then, Nathan, you and I went to one here in Dallas when you visited called Mamani.
Before we get into Mamani, though, I do want to give a shout out to Gaijin. So that's actually a big gourmand restaurant, but that one in Chicago, of the ones I've been to, I actually kind of feel like it is fine dining because when I go, I get their okonomiyaki. That's what they're known for. It's a Japanese dish that's a savory pancake. It's kind of cooked in front of you depending on what table you're at, but then you also have the option to get kakigori, which are these giant snow cones, and they have one that's shaped in a panda. So I
Oh my
always go and I
gosh.
get the okonomiyaki and then the kakigori shaped like a panda, and the flavors change. So it's been like chocolate. I've also had it in some sort of tropical fruit flavor, but it's really good. But it feels luxurious or it feels like fine dining because I'm getting more dishes than I usually get. And I feel like that's something that links, dinner parties to fine dining at restaurants. It's like the experience of getting multiple courses.
Oh, okay, I have to hit that place up immediately. That sounds so good. Yeah, okonomiyaki is one of my favorite Japanese meals. It's just, like, so, like, savory and filling and, like, especially, like, when you're with a bunch of people, it's almost like hot pot, where it's so interactive to see them, like, make it in front of you, That sounds so cool.
Yeah, it's really delicious. But yeah, we can talk about Mamani now. So I went with you in Dallas, and for me, that was the first restaurant that I know of that I've been to that has a star. That was your second time going, right?
Yeah, that was my 2nd time, and I was actually really surprised that they had changed the menu quite a bit since I had been a couple months ago, not in terms of what was on it, but how they prepared things. And so it kind of signaled to me that they were really thinking about the best way to prepare these ingredients, right? Like we said, they're always thinking about how to improve things and, retain that star, which interestingly they got mere weeks after they opened, which is super unorthodox, right? For a restaurant to get a star as quickly as Mamani did. Typically, a place has to be open for, I mean, at least a year, but usually a few years before it gets 1 star. So the fact that they got 1 star so quickly was pretty amazing.
When I was with you, I had, I think, 4 courses. We also started out with a drink. The nicest thing to me about the meal was that before they seat you at the table, they actually bring you to this side room where there's a bar. And they seat you and then they prepare drinks before your meal that you can bring to your meal. And that just felt luxurious to me. The fact that there was this new experience I was having and that, there was no rush to it. They were just like letting us sit and relax before we were seated.
Yeah, like that luxury experience to me, it really sticks out because you're right. Like there is no rush to seat people, to turn tables over, right? They were very much just very accommodating. And I even encouraged you to like order that mocktail, the cherry mocktail that you had, because, when you're at a normal restaurant, you look at a menu and you think, oh, okay, well, they don't have this specific drink. So I guess I won't be ordering that. But when it comes to high-end experiences, you actually have a lot more wiggle room to request things to be custom made that you normally wouldn't.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I did order a drink that wasn't on the menu because there wasn't anything listed on the menu that was explicitly non-alcoholic. So I told them to make me something that was sort of cherry inspired. Or actually, I think I said cherry flavored, but they didn't have any cherry drinks. So they had to really like think outside the box to give me something that had that flavor profile. And I liked what they gave me, but they seemed sort of skeptical that it was going to be good. They were like, I tried. And
Yeah,
yeah,
this was definitely a new experience for them.
yeah, they did their best.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that honestly is part of what's exciting for bartenders at places like this too, like when you go to a cocktail lounge, like making interesting new drinks and like challenging themselves is actually part of what bartenders like. They don't want to make the same generic drink over and over again. They like to think outside the box, and yeah, the fact that they were able to make that for you was really cool of them. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and I always think of it as like, "Look, I'm already paying this much to go to a Michelin place, whenever I go, so might as well have any request that I want," right? But yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
I like that aspect of storytelling that the restaurant had too, right? It kinda brought to mind for me the dinner parties episode, right? The fact that in a dinner party, you actually do go into the drawing room and you have the cocktail hour, like, before the proper dinner that you sit down for. So it really mimicked being at someone's place in a very intimate dinner party in that way, which I loved.
Yeah, because what the menu was, those were cocktails, right? I don't know the difference really that well because 'cause I'm a non-drinker, but
Oh, yeah, yeah, it was all cocktails with a bit of dessert as well, which I'm not sure why, but yeah, mostly cocktails, though.
it's interesting. But yeah, the food itself, honestly, not, like, the best food I've ever had, like, I enjoyed it, it was fine, but, like, the pasta I had, for example, the cavatelli, it reminded me of the staff lunches that were available at the Museum of Contemporary Art because they would have, like, $7 lunches at Marisol. It tasted really similar, so it wasn't, like, anything that blew me away, but I did enjoy the butter that was served as part of the bread that we ordered. That was really exceptional. It was absurdly smooth. One of the waiters, I heard them telling an anecdote about how sometimes people, if that's the only morsel left over from the meal, that they'll actually bring that home with them because the butter alone is that good.
Yeah, that butter is next level. That honestly that and the, crudo were the 2 things that I was most looking forward to actually because, yeah, like, it really that Michelin expertise, like, I don't know what they bring to it, but they really make the best butter ever, and when it comes out, it's served almost like it was rolled up like a piece of paper, like, that's how smooth and structured the butter is, like, it's so perfectly salted that I was kinda living for it. And then after that, I also really noticed that the dishes came out extremely quickly. And, like, we'll talk about this when it comes to the service part of our episode, but the, quickness with which these dishes are served out is a really, really major part of the fine dining experience. Like, it really, really adds that level of professionalism that fine dining establishments have. Like, every second counts when it comes to, fine dining.
Yeah, that's true. I did think that they were pretty prompt with things, like they would notice when, we needed a plate taken away or we needed an additional piece of silverware or something.
Yeah, that was great too, and I don't know if you noticed this, Nathan, but our server also was super, social and helpful and attentive, and that is also part of this because, at a normal restaurant, the baseline is just serving people the food itself, right? Like, they don't have to really go above and beyond because there's no Michelin star that they're preserving, but true hospitality is where restaurants like this shine. So that was also
Yeah.
really cool to see up close.
I want to address the Anthony Bourdain comment that you wrote in the docket.
Ah, yes. Anthony Bourdain, famously very flippant about the fine dining culture as a chef himself. He commented on the Michelin Guide, calling it quote unquote bullshit and saying that it was just too stuffy and massed, mediocre food, all style and no substance. What do you think about this, Nathan? This is a pretty damning condemnation of the Michelin Guide.
I wouldn't use language that harsh because I don't swear, but that was not the best meal I've ever had. Because
So you
actually
agree with Bourdain?
I came back to Chicago, and literally the first restaurant meal I had, it was at this Chinese restaurant called Chengdu Bistro. It was dry chili chicken, and I, loved it so much that I've been back 3 times in 3 weeks. I didn't go to Mamani and have that feeling like, "Oh, if I lived in Dallas, I would come back next week because I loved it so much." Like, that was not the experience I had.
Yeah, you actually liked, this Tex-Mex chain here called Mi Casina. You liked that more actually, right?
I did. I mean, to be honest, usually when I travel, I only find, like, 1 or 2 things that really blow me away. when I'm eating out. I guess for me, the butter at Mamani was did blow me away. And then also the, Sendoichi restaurant where there were the Japanese sandos. I really like that in Dallas as well. But something I wanna tie to Anthony Bourdain's observation, Nymphet alumni, they once pointed out that the people that have to think about the same thing all the time, like fashion, hair, or fine dining, they start to produce things that are kind of whack because they're trying to cure their own boredom. And to everyday people that are not working in that field, they're content with a lot less, and they don't actually want there to be this, like, avant-garde that is always pushing the boundary of what's socially acceptable or what, uh yeah, anyway, you do have to kind of, really be involved with dining to truly appreciate a Michelin star experience. But that's one thing that I do actually think is a bit worth it is just that, like, I've had so many, like, okay restaurant experiences, like, I've had, generic Mexican or Thai food or, like, other cuisines too many times, and so it actually does appeal to me, the idea of, like, having something I've never had before. Like, at Alinea, they have this one dish that's inspired by the streetscape of Chicago where it's, like, meant to look like spray painted cement, but, like, that to me, I'm like, "What does that taste like?" Like, I'm sure that would actually engage me. But yeah, I don't know, on one hand, I don't really think Michelin's worth it, but there is this aspect of it that I do find appealing.
Yeah, I totally get that though. Like that comment about people who just think about food a lot. And like we really caught a lot of that in the Alenia episode of Chef's Table where, you really saw just how much workshopping each of these dishes got. And as you mentioned, most people what they appreciate about food isn't necessarily the things that are coming up in those meetings and in those rooms, right? Like the value system can be a little bit, contested when it comes to the diner and the head chef sometimes, and so that's where a lot of these criticisms come in of the all style and no substance, critiques.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about some other criticisms of fine dining now, like their toxic kitchen culture.
Yes. So this is the part of kitchen culture and fine dining that is very hard for me to ignore as someone who loves fine dining media. Like I'm someone who loved The Bear, who likes Chef's Table, and just media like that about fine dining, even like the Bourdain book and everything, right? Like, so those things that are so essential to fine dining culture they really do encourage a very toxic side of things. So, to talk about the culture, right? People in this industry, they tend to be very specific personalities. They're very no nonsense. They're very blunt. And they're usually people who are characterized as very high stress type A people, right? Like they can get to a point where they take fine dining so seriously that they sacrifice the mental and emotional health of the people in the kitchens, right? And Bourdain has really recently, when people reevaluate his legacy, and his book Kitchen Confidential, they really talk about how he represented the broy side of this industry, right? Where he really was glamorizing this very dangerous and high stress work environment. And he even was someone who criticized whether women could be as productive in the kitchen as well, right? He actually thought of them as being more emotional and therefore less liable to be good workers in the kitchen.
There's always been that, like, women historically have cooked in homes far more, but then it's always like men are viewed as being the best in the field in terms of like the culinary arts, and there's always been a weird double standard.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's almost as if like when women are in the culinary arts, it's just purely for homemaking's sake, right? But
Yeah.
when men do it, it gets elevated to art or elevated to something that is just so much more high-minded and takes so much more of a logical brain to figure out or pursue. When in reality, a lot of those top chefs are women as well, right? So yeah, a lot of those criticisms. Now, Bourdain has walked back a lot of the things that he said in his book Kitchen Confidential, such as his comment about, hating vegetarians and vegans, and stuff like that, just, like, the kind of broy stuff that he brought up in his book, but, that culture still persists as we, saw in that show, The Bear, right? That culture is still very much familiar to people who work in the industry.
Yeah, and it's not something that the industry really tries to hide. My dad actually went to Charlie Trotter's in the '90s. He got a kitchen table or a chef's table that was in the kitchen with, like, my mom and then 3 friends. He said it was a really expensive meal. For the 5 of them, it was $1,400 in 1990s money, so it was pretty expensive. But that's not the only, like, Michelin star restaurant or fine dining restaurant that has a chef's table where you can go in the kitchen. But my dad, when he was seated, like, he could see Charlie Trotter just, like, lambasting all of the kitchen staff, and every night, there's a different person in the kitchen seeing him do the same thing over and over again. So it's not something that, like, he felt the need to hide or all of the other restaurants that have chef's tables, feel the need to hide. It's considered to be, like, a normal part of the industry and the work culture.
Yeah, yeah, like, it's so accepted, right? Like, I feel
Yeah.
like even seeing things like 7 Days Out, like I mentioned earlier, or Chef's Table, like, even when you're making a documentary, if you're on camera, people don't really take the time to hide something like that. They're just like, "This is business as usual, and we're just gonna proceed with it, regardless of whether there's a film crew here or not."
Yeah, because in the Chef's Table episode that I watched for this week, Grant Achatz, the chef behind Alinea, he actually worked for Charlie Trotter in an earlier part of his career, and he described him as being a master manipulator. And he said that once he left Charlie Trotter's, he was defeated and questioning everything. It seems like Alinea has a lot more healthy of a kitchen culture. But do you know who Charlie Trotter is? Because I can fill you in if you like.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so he's probably the most famous Chicagoan in the world of fine dining. He's credited with helping create new American cuisine. His flagship restaurant in Chicago, Charlie Trotter's, it had 2 Michelin stars. I don't think it ever got to 3. But yeah, my dad actually photographed his son at some point. He got to have that experience in the kitchen. But I've heard his name a lot throughout my life. Like, there was an exhibit at the Harold Washington Library on him. He's pretty well known here.
That's so cool, like, you and Charlie Trotter's life are only a few degrees of separation away.
A little bit, yeah. But he passed away. His restaurant's no longer around, but there have been talks about reopening it because it's been kept in the family for over a decade, I think. Like, it's just been closed but not running, but they're gonna try to reopen it possibly.
Oh, okay, I look forward to that. Yeah, I'm very curious about eating there,
Mhm.
considering how significant he is.
Yeah, I wouldn't feel the same sort of, desire to go and eat there, though, because I'm sure they'll try to serve some of the same dishes that Charlie Trotter invented in his lifetime, but it's not the same thing as if the chef is still alive.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely so different, like, they talk about that a lot in Jiro as well, right? Like, the difference between the father and the successor, so, yeah, I get that. But yeah, onto another critique that people bring up a lot about fine dining, which kind of come up in the Bourdain criticism, is this idea of pretension and stylization over quality and the true food experience, right? I actually found a really great article while researching this by a Substacker named Julie Wallace, where she originally was talking about the movie American Psycho, or she talks about the way that fine dining is represented in that film, which I find really interesting since that is a lot of people's major memory of how fine dining is represented, right? Like, Nathan, I gave you a bunch of stuff to watch for this episode because I just find the way that in pop culture, the way we conceive of fine dining is really interesting. It says a lot about how the general public, mostly people who aren't eating places like this, perceive fine dining. But
Well,
what
yeah,
does
because
Paula
for
think?
most people, they never get to have a true fine dining experience. It's only something that they experience secondhand through media.
Yeah, literally. I mean, when you think about it, like the number of people who don't live in an urban center and who just don't have the interest in saving up like $400 for one 2 or 3 hour seating. I mean, that's like most people, right?
Yeah, no, I doubt very many people ever get to have a fine dining experience. I mean, my dad loves food, and to my knowledge, that one meal he had at Charlie Trotter's is probably his only Michelin experience that he's ever had or will ever have.
Did you find that it was worth it?
But my dad loved it. He did like it a lot. He said there was, like, a split pea soup that was really exceptional.
I never had split pea, so hopefully they'll reopen that and I can try it. But,
Yeah.
yeah, but, what does Wallace say about this, elitism in fine dining? I found this quote really interesting. She talks about pretentious dishes that feature really prominently in American Psycho. She talks about how they, quote, "create a sense of social cachet," which then creates things like reservations and wait lists, which mostly just taps into our human weakness of FOMO. And this FOMO is what appeals to our baser tribalistic instincts and impulses to belong, to be safe and secure, to ensure community and affection and acceptance from other humans. So, when you really think about it, a lot of fine dining culture is really predicated on the C and B scene kind of culture, right? This idea that the food is secondary to things like wait lists, to being seen in certain restaurants, to going to openings, to being able to say that you've been in a certain place, right? And this level of elitism and pretension can overshadow the true art form here that we should be focusing on, which is the food.
No, it is that keeping up with the Joneses mentality, which is a mentality that I've really never related to. It seems exhausting to try to do that because it's not like a game you're ever really gonna win. Because at the end of the day, like, it's all in your head.
Yeah, literally. It's such a useless game to play, and a lot of those people who play it are literally just in credit card debt. So they're just going further into debt to prove literally nothing. So it's almost like the treadmill that you run on forever, you know. And that's part of what American Psycho was trying to satirize, right? Like this idea of people just trying to compare themselves to each other to the point that it's just so silly. You know, they're just like comparing something as small as business cards, right?
Yeah, the
Like, it's
typeface on
just
business cards.
yeah, like, it's just it's so small that, like, why would you even care, right?
Yeah.
But, yeah, do you wanna move on to media featuring fine dining?
Yeah, we can talk about Jiro Dreams of Sushi because I did watch that. It's a documentary that covers Jiro Ono, a Japanese sushi chef who has this humble 10-seat restaurant inside of a Tokyo subway station that was actually awarded 3 Michelin stars. He was 85 years old when the documentary was filmed, which is pretty impressive that he was working at that age. But it was crazy to see the amount of work that he puts into his dishes. It was far more than any of the other like the other media I consumed for this week. Yes, it seems like hard work, but this was on a different level. Like they showed some of the sous chefs like massaging octopus for 40 to 45 minutes before it could be prepared. And they
Oh,
were like
yeah.
cooking rice in this really pressurized and complex way. It seems to be worth the effort, but, like, there's really no effort spared in the way that they prepare sushi.
Yeah, yeah, Jiro really elevated sushi to such a high extent that he gained international notoriety, and I think it's really interesting. I chose this movie because Japan actually has a very inordinate amount of Michelin restaurants compared to what you would think, right? So the US has a little over 260 Michelin restaurants. Now, based on that, Nathan, how many Michelin restaurants do you think Japan would have?
I feel like it's gonna be low, so say 50?
350 Michelin restaurants
Oh,
across
okay.
Japan as of late 2025. That's kinda crazy. I didn't really believe that stat when I first read it, but because of the density of Japan, it ends up having such a high number of Michelin restaurants, and I think this documentary is a really good example of why that's the case, because the attention to detail when it comes to Japanese dining is just so, like you said, over the top compared to even the stuff you see in France, right?
Yeah, the documentary, they have this term that they introduce, shokunin, which translates to artisan or craftsman, and it's associated with a greater degree of mastery an artisan is in the United States. And it seems like many of the people working in restaurants, the way that they gain meaning in their life is by trying to master the particular cuisine that they have to cook for life. And they don't really care about making money off of it. It's really about like enjoying work.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually part of why you see so many very elderly people in Japan still, working in restaurants like this, because it's not just a job to them. Like you said, it's a way of life. It's something that, as they talk about in this documentary, they train their whole lives to do, and they kind of go into, like, Jiro's successors and how they have to train for so long just to do the most basic things, right? Like, just to, like you said, pressurize the rice or just to cut the egg that goes on the egg, little roll they serve called tamago, right? Like, just things like that are so major, and the amount of detail that gets put into each little roll. That's one bite, by the way. You do not take bites of sushi, you do it all in one bite. So, all of this work just for one bite of extremely delicious sushi, like, it's well worth the Michelin star from what I can see after seeing this documentary because, yeah, just that level of detail is so impressive.
Yeah. They put a ton of work into it. Another thing that the documentary explores is sort of the theme of legacy because Jerry has 2 sons, and the documentarian, he's addressing, like, what's gonna happen once Jiro dies. Is this restaurant gonna lose all of its customers, and will it just immediately lose all of its Michelin stars? And then they bring up towards the end that actually on the nights when the Michelin inspectors came to visit Jiro's restaurant, the person serving the sushi was the head chef, his son. So the 3 stars that were awarded to Jiro's restaurant, his son is solely responsible for them. So he was saying that, like, based off of that, it's merited that this restaurant is still treated with the same respect after Jiro passes away.
Yeah, yeah, that was so coincidental, and it kinda wraps back into what we talked about, when it comes to the fact that dining is almost like theater, right? Like, it's just so ephemeral. You never know what you're gonna get from experience to experience. So, even if you are a Michelin inspector, you don't know whether you're getting a certain chef one night or another night, a certain, host or hostess from night to night. Like, it really varies so much, and you really have to take that into account when you think about the Michelin Guide.
Yeah. I mean, I was just bringing that up because I think the theme of legacy is extremely important. In general, now, as someone who has, a passion project, when people say platitudes, like when they talk about their dreams and how hard they worked for something, I relate to it far more than I ever did. If I were to have watched this, say, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have found this documentary inspiring, but now I really understand the human condition and what drives people to try to reach higher levels and elevate art forms.
Yeah. So do you feel like you have a successor? If you ever like adopt a son or something, you're gonna be like, okay, you can carry on the podcast in my place.
Yeah, I didn't mean like that. I just found
Oh,
it
okay.
interesting, but yeah, I related to Jiro in a lot of ways. I understand the drive that people have where they start to neglect their own health, which actually, Chef's Table, that was really interesting with the chef Grant Schatz and how he actually got cancer after he'd opened Alinea, and he started to have some pain on his tongue, and it turned out that he had throat or mouth cancer, and he actually was gonna have to have, like, a surgery to get his tongue partially removed or fully removed and then part of his jaw, but they did a different treatment that was a bit more experimental that, allowed him to keep, like, his jaw, but then he lost his taste buds for a period of time before getting them back, but that was, like, crazy. I mean, it was like working
That
himself
was
to the bone while
harrowing.
going through radiation therapy.
Yeah, like, I had no idea. It was so harrowing seeing that. It's like when, a cosmic irony takes place, where one of the greatest chefs just starts losing their sense of taste. Like, I was really gripped by that episode. I was really shocked actually that it was so gripping, and just having an up close view of his evolution and, like, his journey to get to where he was only for that to happen. Yeah, it was really shocking. But yeah, but seeing Alenia up close in general was really cool in that episode because, like you said, he does have that level of passion and he's always like rethinking things. Like a lot of scenes in that episode of Chef's Table are him just like in meeting rooms thinking about how he can innovate something or change something around to become something that no one's ever seen before.
Yeah, that's true. So then, as part of my research for this week's episode, I participated in Chicago Restaurant Week. I'd actually tried to get a reservation as part of it at Michelin star restaurants, but they were understandably all booked up. Like people try to reserve those right away. So instead, I went to two different steakhouses that my friends had picked out. One was Bistro Monadnock in the Monadnock building, which is this really pretty early skyscraper. And then a Japanese steakhouse called Perilla, which has sort of a like Korean barbecue approach to steak. But it was interesting. I mean,
Oh, really?
the Bistro Monadnock experience I didn't like as much because it was sort of standard French food. I wasn't super impressed by it. And then the waiter, seemed to get kind of annoyed with me, like, I asked for, like, a pitcher because they weren't that great at, like, refilling water while I was there. I think that might have offended him because then at the end of the meal, he asked to shake my hand and then was kinda weird about it. I've never had a waiter try to do that, and I think there's something behind it, but Perilla was really cool. They served banchan, dipping sauces, salad along with the meat. But the best part of that meal was, like, this really good Caesar salad that I had, where it had this, like, crisp Parmesan, like, chip, basically, that you could, like, break up. That was really good. Does Dallas have Restaurant Week?
Yeah, we do. I actually have only been to it once because Dallas isn't as much of a foodie city as Chicago, the restaurants that participate really aren't as good. Like whenever I look each year, the menus are always a little bit underwhelming or basic. Like there's one place that I wanted to go this past year and the courses were just like a soup, and then, like, one was like a salad and one was a main, like, it was the most lame and basic menu, and so after that, I just kinda stopped going. I went to, the one place I've been to for Restaurant Week, which was about 2 or 3 years ago, here, was this high-end chain called Carbone. Have you heard of Carbone? They have them, kind of around the US.
I've never heard of them.
Yeah, it's almost like Nobu where it's a very high-end chain that you see across America, and it's mostly like a Italian place. They're very famous for this dish called spicy vodka pasta, and the fact that I got to try that was pretty good, but, it was mostly just pasta, it wasn't anything super special, and all of the Michelin places and the places that are a little bit more my taste in food don't really end up on restaurant week menus. So, yeah, I've only been to one restaurant as part of that, but that's really cool. You had a great experience. Yeah, that Korean place sounds really good.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the experience was okay because this I'm glad that I participated in Chicago Restaurant Week for the first time. It was fun getting to pick from fixed menus, but the deals are not as exceptional as I
Oh
thought
yeah,
they might
no.
be. I mean, because at Bistro Monadnock, you could compare what was on the Restaurant Week menu versus the main menu. What I ordered, I only saved like $5.
Yeah, the
Uh,
deals are not really worth going out of your way for. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, you'll get a three-course meal, and then you look at the regular menu, and it's like, oh, well, I could have just gone on a different day and ordered what I specifically would want?
yeah. There is actually in Chicago, there are a couple of Reddit users that will compile lists. They crunch the numbers and they figure out what the best Chicago Restaurant Week deals are. And I'll link one in the show notes so that people can look at it if they're curious. But the most you can possibly save is 70 to 80. Those are the top 5 restaurants, the best deals, but yeah, typically it's not that high. I only save like $5.
Yeah, yeah, that's how it is these days. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, when it comes to restaurant week, actually that kind of feeds into the next small topic, which is, foodie publications that people should follow, because restaurant week was actually started by the Zagat survey, and of the 3 publications I think people should follow if they wanna hear more about this, one of them is Sagat, one of them is Eater, and the last one is Time Out. So those are 3 if you're interested in learning more about this world, those are 3 publications that you should definitely look further into.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of brings us up to the end of this episode. Nathan, where do you wanna see fine dining go moving forward?
I think I wanna see it focus less on French cuisine. I think that Anthony Bourdain's critique that it focuses too much on French cuisine is true. But I mean, of all the restaurants I learned about as part of this week's episode, I was sort of the most captivated by Alinia's approach and how fun it seems. I think that if you're gonna put this much work into what you're doing, it should be a fun experience at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure, like, not take things to be, too solemn and serious, yeah, I totally get that, I feel like for me, something I wanna see more, fine dining places get into is, like, food from the African diaspora, specifically, like, Nigerian food, because I think there's a lot of room for people to, elevate in a fine dining way, cuisines like Nigerian food. 'Cause, from what I've had in normal restaurants, it's really good, so I'd love to see someone do something very innovative or experimental with it. And I also, in the future, this is, like, in the far future, but I'd love to try this Norwegian Michelin place called Iris, which is it's famous because it's, like, floating in a body of water. So you have to
Wow.
actually walk on a bridge to get into the Michelin restaurant, and it looks super beautiful just architecturally, and the food looks amazing. So that's definitely on my bucket list for fine dining.
I don't know where I'll go next, but I do maybe wanna try to go to Alinea now. But, yeah, thank you for doing the episode with me.
Yeah, this was so fun. Talk to you later.
See you later, bye.